Hi, kids. Okay, I'm going to continue reading Little House on the Prairie, and we left with the whole family had just gotten over a sickness, and the neighbor and the doctor, who was the doctor to the Indians, came and helped and got them through it, or they might have had a really difficult time. And so, as they are recovering, the dad, who is not full strength yet, has built a chair out of willows and wood, and he just finished that. So I'm going to begin right after they finished working on the chair. Then they made a celebration. Ma took off her apron and smoothed her smooth brown hair. She pinned her gold pin in front of her collar. Mary tied the string of beads around Carrie's neck. Pa and Laura put Mary's pillow on the chair seat and set Laura's pillow against its back. Over the pillows, Pa spread the quilt from the little bed. Then he took Ma's hand and led her to the chair, and he put baby Carrie in her arms. Ma leaned back into the softness. Her thin cheeks flushed and her eyes sparkled with tears, but her smile was beautiful. The chair rocked her gently, and she said, "Oh, Charles, I haven't been so comfortable since I know when." Then Pa took his fiddle, and he played and sang to Ma in the firelight. Ma rocked, and baby Carrie went to sleep, and Mary and Laura sat on their bench and were happy. The very next day, without saying where he was going, Pa rode away on Patty. Ma wondered and wondered where he'd gone, and when he came back, he was balancing a watermelon in front of him on the saddle. He could hardly carry it into the house. He let it fall on the floor and dropped down beside it. "I thought I'd never get it here," he said. "It must weigh 40 pounds, and I'm as weak as water. Hand me the butcher knife." "But Charles," Ma said, "you mustn't." Mrs. Scott laughed. Pa laughed his big peeling laugh again. "But that's not reasonable," he said. "This is a good melon. Why should it have fever and ague? Everybody knows that fever and ague comes from breathing in the night air." "This watermelon grew in the night air," said Ma. "Nonsense," Pa said. "Give me the butcher knife. I'd eat this melon if I knew it would give me chills and fever." "I do believe you would," said Ma, handing him the knife. It went into the melon with a luscious sound. The green rind split open, and there was the bright red inside, flecked with black seeds. The red heart actually looked frosty. Nothing had ever been so tempting as that watermelon on a hot day. Ma would not taste it. She would not let Laura and Mary eat one bite. But Pa ate slice after slice after slice until at last he sighed and said the cow could have the rest of it. Next day, he had a little chill and a little fever. Ma blamed the watermelon, but next day she had a little chill and a fever. So they did not know what could have caused it. No one knew in those days that fever and ague was malaria and that some mosquitoes give it to people when they bit them. So now we know today what it would be, but we did not know back then. Okay, the next chapter, and I'm going to show you the picture because it does give away kind of what it's about, but I would show you the picture if we were sitting around my big chair on pillows too. So it's called Fire in the Chimney, and that does not look like a normal, ordinary fire, does it? Okay, let's see what happens. The prairie had changed. Now it was red, dark yellow, almost brown, and red streaks of sumac lay across it. The wind wailed in the tan grass, and it whispered sadly across the curly, short buffalo grass. At night, the wind sounded like someone crying. Pa said again that this was a great country. In the big woods, he had had to cut hay and cure it and stack it and put it in the barn for the winter. Here in the high prairie, the sun had cured the wild grass where it stood, and all winter the mustangs and the cow could mow their own hay. He needed only a small stack for stormy days. Now the weather was cooler and he would go to town. He had not gone while the summer was hot because the heat would be too hard on Pet and Patty. They must pull the wagon 20 miles a day to get to town in 2 days, and he did not want to be away from home even longer than he had to. He stacked the small stack of hay by the barn. He cut the winter's wood and quartered it in a long cord against the house. Now he had only to get meat enough to last while he was gone, so he took his gun and went hunting. Laura and Mary played in the wind outdoors. When they heard a shot echo in the woods along the creek, they knew that Pa had got some meat. The wind was cooler now, and all along the creek bottoms, flocks of wild ducks were rising and flying and settling again. Up from the creek came long lines of wild geese forming in V's, for their flight farther south. The leader in front called to those behind him. Honk, he called. All down the lines of wild geese answered, one after the other. Honk, honk, honk. Then he cried honk, and they all honked again. Straight away, south he flew on his strong wings, and the long lines evenly followed him. The treetops along the creek were colored now. Oaks were red and yellows and browns and greens. Cottonwoods and sycamores and walnuts were sunshiny yellow. The sky was not brightly blue, and the wind was rough. That afternoon, the wind blew fiercely, and it was cold. Ma called Mary and Laura into the house. She built up a fire and drew her rocker near it, and she sat rocking baby Carrie and singing softly to her. Laura heard a little crackling in the chimney, and Ma stopped singing. She bent forward and looked up the chimney. Then she got up quietly, put Carrie in Mary's arms, pushed Mary down into the rocking chair, and hurried outdoors. Laura ran after her. The whole top of the chimney was on fire. The sticks that made it were burning up. The fire was roaring in the wind and licking towards the helpless roof. Ma seized a long pole and struck at the fire, and burning sticks fell all around her. Laura didn't know what to do. She grabbed a pole too, but Ma told her to stay away. The roaring fire was terrible. It could burn the whole house, and Laura couldn't do anything. She ran into the house. Burning sticks and coal were falling down in the chimney and rolling out on the hearth. The house was full of smoke. One big blazing stick rolled on the floor under Mary's skirts. Mary couldn't move. She was scared. Laura was too scared to think. She grabbed the back of the heavy rocking chair and pulled with all her might. The chair with Mary and Carrie in it came sliding back across the floor. Laura grabbed up the burning stick and flung it into the fireplace just as Ma came in. That's a good girl, Laura, to remember I told you never to leave fire on the floor, Ma said. She took the water pail and quickly and quietly poured water on the fire in the fireplace. Clouds of steam came out. Then Ma said, "Did you burn your hands?" She looked at Laura's hands, but they were not burned because she had thrown the burning stick so quickly. Laura was not really crying. She was too big to cry. Only one tear ran out of each eye, and her throat choked up. But that was not crying. She hid her face against Ma and hung onto her tight. She was so glad the fire had not hurt Ma. "Don't cry, Laura," Ma said, stroking her. "Were you afraid?" "Yes," Laura said. "I was afraid Mary and Carrie would burn up. I was afraid the house would burn up and we wouldn't have any house. I'm scared now." Mary could talk now. She told Ma how Laura had pulled the chair away from the fire. Laura was so little and the chair was so big and so heavy with Mary and Carrie in it that Ma was surprised. She said she didn't know how Laura had done it. "You were a brave girl, Laura," she said. But Laura had really been terribly scared. "And no harm done," Ma said. "The house didn't burn up and Mary's skirts didn't catch fire and burn her and Carrie. So everything is all right." When Pa came home, he found the fire out. The wind was roaring over the low stone top of the chimney and the house was cold. But Pa said he would build up the chimney with green sticks and fresh clay and plaster it well so that it wouldn't catch fire again. He had brought 4 fat ducks, and he said he could have killed hundreds, but 4 were all they needed. He said to Ma, "You save the feathers from the ducks and the geese we eat, and I'll shoot you a feather bed." He could, of course, have got a deer, but the weather was not cold enough to freeze the meat and keep it from spoiling before they could eat it. And he had found the place where a flock of wild turkeys roasted. "Our Thanksgiving and Christmas turkeys," he said. "Great big fat fellows. I'll get them when the time comes." Pa went whistling to mix mud and cut green sticks and build the chimney up again, while Ma cleaned the ducks. Then the fire merrily crackled. A fat duck roasted and the cornbread baked. Everything was snug and cozy again. After supper, Pa said he supposed he'd better start to town early the next morning. "Might as well go and get it over with," he said. "Yes, Charles, you'd better go," Ma said. "We could get along all right if I didn't," said Pa. "There's no need of running to town all the time for every little thing. I have smoked better tobacco than the stuff Scott raised back in Indiana, but it will do. I'll raise some next summer and pay him back. I wish I hadn't borrowed those nails from Edwards." "Well, you did borrow them, Charles," Ma replied. "And as for the tobacco, you don't like borrowing any more than I do. We need more quinine. I've been sparing with the cornmeal, but it's almost gone, and so is the sugar. You could find a bee tree, but there's no cornmeal to be found. So as far as I know, and we'll raise no corn till next year. A little salt pork would taste good too after all this wild game. And Charles, I'd like to write to the folks in Wisconsin. If you mail a letter now, they can write this spring and then we can hear from them next spring. We can write this winter and then we can hear from them next spring. You're right, Caroline, you always are, Pa said. Then he turned to Mary and Laura and said it was bedtime. If he was going to start early in the morning, he'd better start sleeping early tonight. He pulled off his boots while Mary and Laura got into their nightgowns, but when they were in bed, he took down his fiddle and he softly played and sang. Ma turned to him and smiled. Take care of yourself on the trip, Charles, and don't worry about us, she told him. We will be all right. That's the end of the chapter. All right. Bye, kids.